Operation Ladbroke was the opening action of Operation Husky, the wider Allied invasion of Sicily, beginning on the 9th of July 1943. British General Montgomery convinced Eisenhower and the rest of the team that the focus should be on southern eastern Sicily and that they should ignore Palermo. There was already tension between the British and the American military command, particularly Montgomery's very competitive attitude with General George S. Patton and his sometimes tactless manner. The Allies quickly decided that the landing zone should be south of Syracuse to avoid the defences to the north of the city on Capo Santa Panagia. The defences of Syracuse were mainly fixed coastal strongholds, pillboxes, bunkers, and 6 long-range gun batteries, some anti-aircraft positions, mainly on the Maddalena Peninsula and between Punta Milocca and Punta Arenella. The Maddalena Peninsula was defended by 3,000 men of the 385th Coastal Battalion, of which there was the naval battery Lambadoria near Capomoro di Porco, more on that later, which was manned by a cavalry squadron as well as a black-shirt battalion. There's an Italian-German communications centre also at Capomoro di Porco. There was also naval battery Emanuele Rosso. There was a seaplane base at Augusta, north of Syracuse, and the Germans did install Freya radar in the area. By July 1943, Sicily was defended by about 200,000 Italian troops, 32,000 German troops, and 30,000 Luftwaffe ground staff. General Alfredo Guzzoni commanded both frontline infantry divisions and weaker coastal forces who defended the ports. His plan was that coastal formations would delay any landing while his stronger reinforcements launched a counterattack, and this would include the 75th Napoli Infantry Regiment, which was based on the Maddalena Peninsula and Syracuse, as well as the Panzer Division Hermann Göring, which were based more inland near Vizzini. The primary objective of Operation Ladbroke was to secure Ponte Grande, codenamed Waterloo, and this was a bridge which controlled access to the port city of Syracuse. Achieving this involved neutralising the nearby defences on the Maddalena Peninsula, which threatened the planned landing zones of the follow-up Operation Husky. The key risks to address were the Lambadoria battery on Capo Moro di Porco. These were 3 coastal defence guns and 3 anti-aircraft guns. There was also Emanuele Russo battery, which guarded the southern entrance to the port of Syracuse. The port of Syracuse would open a gateway for quickly landing supplies for the wider Allied invasion of Sicily. Allied training for the operation did not go well. British General Montgomery advocated gliders rather than airborne paratroops, despite the objections of the Royal Air Force. The 51st and the 52nd Troop Carrier Wings had little or no glider experience. They warned that a glider landing at night with inexperienced crews was not practicable. They were well short of being operationally ready for combat. Operation Ladbroke was divided into 3 key phases. Phase 1, the glider pilots of the 2nd Battalion South Staffordshire Regiment were to secure the strategically important Ponte Grande. In the second phase, the 1st Battalion Border Regiment would take the nearby railway bridge, codenamed Putney, and the third phase would march into Ortigia and take control of the docks of Syracuse. The plan was the gliders would be towed by a mix of American C-47 Dakotas, British Avro Albemarle and Handley Page Halifax bombers from the 51st Troop Carrier Wing and the RAF 38 Wing, and these would be towing 130 American Waco Hadrians as well as 8 British airspeed Horsa gliders. The glider pilots were British, with some American co-pilots. The cargo was fully British troops. Commandos and Special Air Service SAS of the 1st Special Raiding Squadron, led by Major Paddy Mayne, were to sabotage the key naval battery Lambadoria at Capo Moro di Porco, which posed an immediate risk to any planned landing. The British 1st Air Landing Brigade, commanded by Brigadier Philip Hicks, included approximately 2,000 men from the Border Regiment, the South Staffordshire Regiment, the Air Landing Field Ambulance, and the Field Company of Royal Engineers. On the 9th of July 1943, an aerial bombardment of Syracuse. The purpose was to distract the attention of the defenders from the approaching gliders. This was also to stop defence forces in Syracuse and Ortigia to mount a counterattack. 4 squadrons of 79 British Vickers Wellington bombers of the 37th Squadron bombed the port and the airports of Syracuse, including the seaplane base. This was actually a diversion. 1 British Wellington bomber and its crew was destroyed by anti-aircraft fire. There were other bombing activities of Caltagirone, Palazzolo Acrede and Catania, also as a decoy and to suppress any planned counterattacks in the landing zones. Now remember, this was the first use of gliders in nighttime, using a woefully unprepared crew. The Staffords were supposed to arrive at Ponte Grande Bridge at 11:15 on the 9th of July. Reinforcements were supposed to arrive shortly after 1 a.m. on the 10th of July to reinforce the defence of the same bridge. Let's now get into what happened. Over 2,000 British soldiers in 144 gliders were towed from Tunisia to Sicily. At the time, the seas off the Syracuse coast was rough at 10 p.m. There were also strong winds, and this began to split the formations of aircraft towing gliders. The landing in Sicily began approximately 10 p.m. as the gliders began to reach Syracuse, which was already under bombardment. The American pilots, with no prior war experience, were stunned by the anti-aircraft fire, the strong winds. They had issues with navigation. The release point for the gliders was important. It was 2 miles at sea, enabling the towing aircraft to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Now this meant the margin for error was small. It was really important the location and the distance at which the aircraft towing the gliders cut the cable. Now reports vary, but between 60 and 80 of the 144 gliders were ditched in the rough seas. The soldiers and the crew either drowned, approximately 252 of them. Some survived at sea to be rescued hours later. Some, including Brigadier Pip Hicks, managed to swim ashore. Only 12 to 20 of the gliders actually landed in Sicily, and only 7 of them in the correct planned landing zone. At 11:30, July the 9th, of the original 2,000 men of the 1st Air Landing Brigade, only 30 of them from the 2nd Battalion, South Staffordshire Regiment, had actually arrived, while the rest were scattered well south of the planned landing zone. The SRS were transported to the location by HMS Ulster Monarch and HMT Dunera. They could hear the cries of the crews and soldiers of the ditched gliders drowning in the rough seas. They arrived at 11:30 p.m. at undefended rocks, which were believed by the defenders to be too difficult to climb, particularly in bad weather. At 2 a.m. on the 10th of July, as the British forces delivered by the gliders began to regroup in the village of Cassibile, the 2nd Regiment SAS troops landed at the mouth of the Cassibile River. They captured the bridge and the S115 coastal road, which controlled the approach to the landing beaches. By 3 a.m, British commandos and Sherman tanks began to land around Fontane Bianche beach and began heading north towards Syracuse and inland to Florida. 4:30, July the 10th. The Lambadoria gun battery, the primary objective of the SRS, was already aware of a possible attack by paratroopers. What actually happened was the gun battery was destroyed by the SRS after small arms fire and the use of mortars at around 4:30 a.m. Leaving the wounded behind, SRS leader Paddy Mayne instructed his men to destroy the other Batteria Costiera Emanuele Russo, the other main gun battery in the area. As the Italians planned to detonate Ponte Grande Bridge, the key target of Operation Ladbroke, the 30 troops from the 2nd Battalion Staffords proceeded to capture the bridge and removed the demolition charges. Soon reinforced to 87 men, the Allied troops managed to hold Ponte Grande Bridge for nearly 16 hours against Italian counterattacks by the 75th Napoli Infantry Regiment and other nearby naval units. Out of ammunition and mostly wounded, the Staffords surrendered on the afternoon of July the 10th. Shortly afterwards, the British 5th Infantry Division, the 2nd Battalion Royal Scots Fusiliers, arrived at 4:15 and recaptured Ponte Grande Bridge. As further troops on both sides arrived, the battle ensued in the area surrounding the bridge. At 5 p.m. on the 10th of July, the 1st Battalion Border Regiment was ordered to blow up the defences of Syracuse and proceed to northern outskirts of Melilli and Augusta. The feared Italian gun battery Opera A at Capo Santa Panaggia fired upon approaching ships 17 times, but then received orders to scuttle the gun battery, which the gun crew promptly obeyed. The few Germans had already left Syracuse. The city had fallen. The hungry British began to eat from the local orange trees and tomato fields as they marched into a largely abandoned Syracuse about 9 p.m. on 10th of July. The Allied fleet entered the port of Syracuse on the night of July the 10th, 1943. They brought with them the 8th Army, landing craft and amphibious vehicles. Operation Ladbroke concluded on the 11th of July, 1943, but the landings continued along the coast from Fontane Bianche, George Beach, to Portopalo di Capo Passero. So what's the conclusion of the operation? Well, despite a series of disasters and poor planning, the objectives of Operation Ladbroke, particularly securing the key bridge, were achieved, and this paved the way for the main assault by the 8th Army. This was the first mass glider assault at night time by Allied forces. The operation suffered very high casualties. It suffered from poor weather and learnt a brutal lesson in coming across anti-aircraft fire. These key lessons were learned and they would influence future airborne operations, including D-Day in 1944. Landing supplies across the beaches proved easier than expected due to large numbers of the new amphibious vehicles, DUKW. General Harold Alexander wrote, "It's not too much to say that the DUKW revolutionised the problem of beach maintenance." British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, while noting the successful capture of Syracuse, noted of Operation Ladbroke, quote, "This was a very serious disaster." British losses were approximately 252 drowned, another 443 dead, wounded or taken prisoner. The Italian casualties were hard to estimate. The heavy losses caused many recriminations between the British and the American command over the performance and the blame of the aircraft tug and the glider pilots. Click here to get even closer to Italy and Sicily.